Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'm in the middle of this crazy oyster tour. I am wearing my Liberty Pure shirt. I have my Liberty Pure water, 1-800 Clean Water. If you have a well, if you have plumbing, they came and did an incredible job of plumbing at my place. Give them a call. They're there. They keep your water clean, my water clean, just like the oysters keep the water out in the bay clean. I've been eating a lot of oysters. About 17 days into this right now, all over the place. Gone from Annapolis, I went up to Cecil County over the weekend. I've been out to Frederick for oyster shooters. So I've been all over the state. All of it brought to you by our friends at the Maryland Lottery in conjunction with Jiffy Lube Multicare. Put the crab cake tour together as well. We were at Fadley's last week. We're going to be at Costas this Friday, and we're going to be at Pizza John's in Essex on the 11th. We have postponed yet again our state fair event from Tuesday with County Executive Angela Alsterbrooks of Prince George's County. She is running for the U.S. Senate, and Larry Hogan's also been invited, just so we're square on a day when we've done a lot of residue on football and 22-point lead and Dak Prescott and Lamar Jackson and John Harbaugh and Justin Tucker and the offensive line. And I just go through the whole list of all of that. And we're going to have plenty of time to talk about Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills coming in at Sunday Night Football and then Joe Burrow next week. But Luke Jones and I have made a living. And I think when it really comes down to it, if I gave Luke what Charlie Ekman would call it a saliva test, the truth serum, he would tell me and you that he loves the Orioles and he covers the Ravens at this point. And you love baseball and you still endure and know a lot about football and watch the 76ers and whatnot. But baseball's your thing. You're an old soul, Lucas Jones. Happy pre-birthday. By the way, I'm looking forward to some pizza with you on the 11th as we celebrate some birthdays. My kid had his 40th birthday over the weekend. And unlike you, who was alive and just a little Lucas with daddy at home watching the 83 World Series, my kid's never seen a championship. He was born when the Tigers were winning the World Series in 84. So I would just say this is the biggest baseball week at the until next week and then the following week. But this is where Bill Parcells. This is why you lift all them weights. We're getting down to the nitty gritty. These games in New York, and they're going to be a wild card team. Where are they going to be? How the pitching going to match? But losing series after series after series. I know the one series they can't afford to lose is the one next week.
Yeah, and that's where this week's a little strange in the sense that there's not a they have a little bit of business to take care of, right? The division's over. I mean, they're not winning out. The Yankees aren't losing out, right? I mean, that's over. So it's the wild card, and you go into the Monday's off day, up four. Kansas City may not make it. I mean, they can't win a game right now. But Detroit took 2 out of 3 from the Orioles. Of course, they've been playing really good baseball these last few weeks. I mean, talk about you mentioned the '84 Tigers. It's not quite that for the Tigers in the month of September, but they've been on a roll, and certainly if they get in, they're going to be a team that whoever the favorite is going to be looking at and saying, "Oh, I don't know if I want to play them." But Kansas City struggling, Minnesota, the Orioles. There's a very distinct possibility the Orioles are playing in Minnesota this weekend. We know that's happening, but it could be followed by Minnesota coming to Baltimore for the wild card round. I mean, that's the way it could play out. So there isn't a ton on the line for the Orioles in the sense that they need to go 6-0 here, or they even need to go 5-1, or even that they need to go 4-2 or 3-3. They've got to win. Presumably, a couple of these teams that they need to lose will lose at some point here in the next few days, and they'll clinch. They're still in fantastic shape mathematically for the top wild card. That would have to be an 0-6, 1-5, and then one of these other teams just goes nuts because even the tiebreakers mostly work in the Orioles' favor. So there's not a whole lot on the line in terms of the outcome of these final 6 regular season games, other than, okay, get the clinch out of the way, and then it's getting at bats. Jordan Westberg returned on Sunday. Ramon Arias returned on Sunday. Danny Coulomb returned Friday night. Jacob Webb, we know, returned last weekend. The Ryan Mountcastle, presumably, we're going to see activated at some point here over the next couple of days as he finished up a rehab assignment with Norfolk, who's done now. So it's either activate him or maybe you have him play a sim game or two or something like that. So we assume we're going to see him. We're still waiting on Grayson Rodriguez. Obviously, that's on skates a little bit more in terms of when and if that's going to happen. But you coined it last week, and I think it was very spot on, especially now knowing that unfortunately these Orioles Yankees games aren't going to mean a whole lot, certainly to what it means for the division, because the Yankees, have it all but locked up officially. But this is an opportunity to align some things, get guys some at bats who need at bats, try to see if you can get some guys on the right track. This is another weekend where Santander's walk-off Thursday. They hit a season-high 5 home runs Friday night. Corbin Burnes looks excellent again. Back-to-back starts where we've seen the best version of Corbin Burnes, which obviously you want going into the month of October. But then they take another step back on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday they got a decent outing from Cade Povich. Good enough to win, but Gunnar hits the game tying double, but they can't get the winning run home, and you just bullpen and frustrations there. And then on Sunday, Albert Suarez wasn't great. They come back and then they give up the lead almost immediately. So or give up they give them the lead back after it was tied. So
The consistent thing here is that they're not hitting the ball.
yeah,
That's really the issue right now, and they need to hit the ball next week.
yeah, there's that. I still don't feel great about the bullpen. I feel better about it with Danny Coulomb and Jacob Webb back in the mix, but is that a bullpen that feels particularly deep right now? No, but you're right.
By the
And I
way,
said
these are
this
the
weeks
pitchers they're
ago,
going to
and I'm
see.
not.
They're going to see the Yankees and the Twins. They're probably going to see the Twins next week, and if they win, they're like this is the pitching that they're going to need to hit. You mentioned the Tigers might sneak it, right? Like it's this time of the year and this kind of pitching that talk about timing and everything you want to see. And by the way, even over the weekend, seeing the shadows fall over the diamond, the whole thing looks and feels different
Yeah.
this time of year, doesn't it?
Oh, it definitely does. And right down to, even on Friday night, it was a 7:05, one of those Apple games that I know we all love so much. But it was dark. It was pretty much dark at first pitch, or very close to it anyway. And that's, you get that feeling after when you're at the ballpark in June and July and August, and it doesn't get dark till the sixth inning, seventh inning, and now you're in a position where, yeah, it feels more like fall. But you're right. They've got to get their offense going, and it was great to see Mullins hit a home run, and certainly great to see Westberg back in the lineup and on the field. Great to see Ramon Arias back in the lineup on the field. But for those guys, it's about getting them at bats. It's about trying to get other guys going. I think Brandon Hyde has to walk a fine line here. This is not the scenario from last year where you get the 5 days off and you're trying to figure that out. You do want to try to get some of these guys off their feet a little bit once you've clinched, once you're in a position where you're locked in to where you're going to be, and they're still in a position where they can do that if they just get a couple wins early in the week, relatively early in the week. You'd hope by Saturday, let's say, those last couple games, you can take your foot off the gas a little bit, just in terms of being sensible, getting guys a blow, knowing that you're going to be right back at it Tuesday.
No, wait, do
Playing
these
for your
guys really
season.
run around on Friday night and squirt champagne on each other and act like fools after? Yeah, I know they will, and that's the way it works, and that's the way it goes and stuff. But I'm thinking to myself, it certainly does feel like a stumble to whatever
Yeah.
this you having to put on goggles and a wallpaper to go down there and see them run around celebrating that they lost the division, kind of sort of. This is doesn't feel celebratory. I guess that's all I'm saying. It feels like it'd be very, as a fan, as a citizen, as a stakeholder in Mr. Rubenstein's, excuse me, Mr. Arrighetti's franchise. Um, it feels anticlimactic and it feels very hollow to be
Yeah.
running around and saying we got in.
Well,
Better win
I
next week.
I think look, I think we also need to recognize, for as frustrating as the last few months have been, this is going to be the first time since 1996 and 97 that they've been in the postseason back-to-back years.
It's a
You
hell
know,
of an accomplishment.
it's a long time. And I don't want to, I agree with you. look, they're going to celebrate, and they should celebrate. But is it going to be the, oh my gosh, it's the Bender that you're out to 6 a.m. celebrating? No, I think it'll be more subdued than that in terms of like recognizing, hey, we still have some games here. We got to secure the top wild card spot, and we have a quick turnaround. This
Instead of
is,
champagne and booze, they should all have a circle prayer and get in the middle and light some candles and do some ohms and listen to some Pearl Jam release and mellow to f out and say we made. They should, it should be a group exhale.
yeah,
Like literally, that's what it should be.
I was just going to say exhale, because that Santander walk-off felt like an exhale. I mean, Zach Eflin, I said this to you late last week, literally coined it as a breath of fresh air that they needed. I mean, they did because it felt like death spiral. They win two in a row, but then they lose two in a row. It's this that's what the
Well, it's
second
nice
half
that
has
they at
been.
least had that moment because they might not get it this week, to your point, right? That moment where they have a walk off, that Jackson Holiday still eating off that moment. Once you have that moment, you can see, well, I can do this. Just, I don't know if the Kobe Mayos had that moment, but and
Yeah.
some of the bullpen guys, I don't know, but wherever that moment is, I think Corbin Burns, Zach Eflin, where they are, even Suarez, despite, I'm gonna did you know it's National Hispanic Heritage Month, Luke? I don't know if you're aware of that or not, if you saw that on the NFL broadcast or the Major League Baseball broadcast. But nonetheless, Suarez, where are you with injuries in a general sense? Westberg, Urias, obviously Mullins escaped. What we beat each other up so much about the opening day roster, who's going to be there, who's not. We know Craig Kimball's not going to be on the playoff roster, but
Right.
where are you on makeup in regard to that and in regard to what needs to be seen this week from any number of people that are probably on the wrong side of the fence of making the team next week, right?
Yeah, I mean, we saw Kobe Mayo get optioned. He's barring something strange, and they did option him at a time where you could have him play for the postseason if he needed to. But I say this with no disrespect. He was the minor league player of the year for the Orioles this year. I still think he's going to be a heck of a player before it's all said and done. He's done nothing to warrant being on the postseason roster. I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. Now with guys coming back, I think to me, it's fairly cut and dried from the position player side. Westberg's back, assuming he doesn't wake up Monday morning or Wednesday morning or next weekend with his hand bothering him. Which I don't think there's any reason to think that. I mean, it was a fracture, not like it was like a ligament or something like that, where you would say, oh, that could be really lingering. Arias, same deal with him, unless he has a setback with his ankle. I mean, they both played 3 games at Norfolk. They both got hits at Norfolk. They both started Sunday, and to me, it's get them some at bats here. Don't run them into the ground. If you want to get them off their feet at some point, say next weekend. But it's go time with them. I mean, Mountcastle, a little more of a question just until we see him activated, and whether that wrist. I mean, a wrist is a tricky thing. When you're talking about a sprained wrist for a hitter, that's something that probably of their position player concerns, that to me would be the one that I'd point to, because also part of that is Ryan O'Hearn struggled to the degree that he has down the stretch, and you'd like to get Mountcastle back in the mix there, and you'd like his defense at first base if nothing else. Bench wise, I think the more interesting emergence has been Emmanuel Rivera. I mean, he's gotten some hits for them. I think he's certainly has made a strong argument for being on the bench in the postseason, way more than even like Eloy Jimenez, who hasn't done anything in the month of September. He's just completely stopped hitting, and he gives you no positional value whatsoever. So, what do you? I could see him being left off the roster. Pitching side, they're not really in a position where like you're like stressing on how are we going to squeeze this guy into the bullpen. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's okay. Is Cade Povich going to be the long man in the bullpen, or is Albert Suarez going to be in the bullpen, and maybe you use him in like the swing role to replace Dean Kramer in the fourth inning, and he bridges the gap? I don't know, but
Well, this is
it
where I
still
would
comes.
say if you're building this for next week, I guess you're thinking the Twins. I don't know whatever you're thinking, whatever one of these teams you're seeing,
Who knows
you're
right now?
building this really for 18 to 27 innings of baseball, right? Like that's what you're building here. You're not building a week or game 7 or game 5. I mean, really, you're building 9 innings tonight and worrying about tomorrow. You're putting your starters in and say, if I get to there, we're going to do that. I'm assuming we'll see Burns on Tuesday. We'll see Eflin on Wednesday, right? Thursday, Kramer, Suarez, the house, wherever it goes, right? But and we could talk about this next week, but I feel like you and I are going to be flooded under the Bills Sunday night. You know what I mean? I feel like it's a weird oxygen around here where you and I spend 3.5 hours talking football before we even get to baseball, and I hope it's not that way next week. If we wake up Monday morning and the Ravens are 1-3, the Orioles better make us feel good. Burns better have a 5 innings in him on Tuesday. At least make it interesting for us because last year was not interesting. This year's way more interesting because they're going to play on Tuesday. There's no more of this who's getting iced, who's not. It's more to your point, like how are they matching guys up this week in games they don't necessarily need to win, but you want to at least see them hit the ball and run the bases and catch the ball, and bullpen guys be crisp and come out and give you the 12, 14, 16, 18 pitches. Hopefully no more than that because you don't, that's not what you want. You want them to get in and out of innings. And playing crisp baseball against playoff caliber teams this week, literally. It's a hell of a warm up. It's fall training, and we've got this whole like thing happening with the football team. But next week, when the baseball thing happens, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you know how this goes, dude. Season's over on Wednesday. Football team's 1-3. Oh my God, what happened? You know what I mean? Like that's so possible right now, and I don't think any of us were dreaming of those sugar plums and fairy tales back in June when Lamar was just going to come back and freight train Mahomes, and we were going to beat the Raiders up, lose that game. And by the way, man, the Orioles are just going to waltz to the division because they are playing 620 ball. And, then real life takes over, as they say, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can always have visions. It doesn't mean it's going to play out that way, which is what makes it fun and excruciating at times. I mean, that's just how it is. But
18 to
I mean,
27 innings. That's it next week, right? For pitching.
oh, sure. I mean, like, and that's why to me, Grayson Rodriguez, it's almost a moot point until we start hearing, okay, he's throwing live batting practice against real hitters. He's throwing a 2 inning sim game. Once it gets to that point, then it's like, okay, maybe he fits into the bullpen. Maybe he's an option for the division series.
He
I
hasn't
mean, at
thrown a
this point,
pitch yet, though, right? Correct?
I mean, he's thrown bullpen sessions. That's it. Which don't get me wrong, that's good. I'm not saying like that he's had a setback or that he's done or anything like that, but they're just running out of time. I mean, the positive here is they got Westberg and Arias back on Sunday. Westberg even hit an RBI double. I mean, it was good to see. He hit a ball to deep left center field. I mean, that was great to see. That was Jordan Westberg hitting doubles and hitting extra base hits. It was great to see him hitting second in the order. I mean,
By the way, they haven't hit a lot of doubles. You want to talk about a talking point the last 90 days, right? Like,
oh, absolutely. Well, and that's the big thing.
they haven't hit a lot of anything.
And I've pushed back on this, this narrative that they're too reliant on the home run. First of all, I'll tell you over and over, most good offenses in 2024 rely on the home run quite a bit. I mean, that's just how it is. But that's the thing. It's not just the home runs. Their doubles have dropped. I mean, go look at what their double rate was in the first half compared to what it's been in the second half.
Well, they're teaching these guys to hit home runs with launch angle, right? Like literally,
well, I mean,
that's the science of hitting a lot hard line drive. That's really, right? I mean, they're being trained to hit home runs.
This is the most simplistic way that I could describe it, that it's been described to me, and this was a couple years ago. But if you kind of think back to what was kind of the old school idea of hit a line drive up the middle, right? That was kind of the way that it's always been. Go back to Little League. That's what your coach would have told you, unless you were the really fast kid and they said hit it on the ground before the shift and all that stuff came into vogue 10, 15 years ago. But the approach now, at least how the Orioles done, and look, launch angle, this is a thing across baseball. All this velo, all these high fastballs, everything you see in that makes pitching so challenging on a pitch by pitch, at bat by at bat basis, regardless of longevity and the injuries and all that, is there's a lot of swing and miss. So the idea is if you're going to have more swing and miss than you had in the past, you better maximize your contact. So that contact's maximized with the idea of hit a line drive off the left center or right center field fence. That's the idea. And when you say a line drive, obviously that's a fly ball, but you don't want to be hitting it a
Hit it
million.
as hard as you can right there, like
Yeah,
literally
I
on a
mean, you want to
straight line.
hit a laser off the left center field fence. That's kind of the mindset now.
And that way, if
And,
it's lazy, it falls between people, not at people, which is up the middle.
well,
And the
I mean, it's
shift
not.
changed all that
I
too.
mean, it's
I
not so
must
much that. I mean, it's you can't really guide the ball. There are very Tony Gwynn could, Wade Boggs could, okay, but very few hitters actually have a consistent ability to guide the ball somewhere. I mean, it's just you can try to go the other way, and you'll have some success doing that. But you know, you can try to do that, but then the pitcher throws a change up in your fold, and you roll over and hit a ground ball to second base. Then, even though your approach was to try to hit it the other way, if you're a left-handed hitter. But so much of it has to do. Yeah, the genesis was the shift in terms of hitting the ball over the shift. That's why that. Yeah, think how many balls get hit hard up the middle past the pitcher. Even now, with the shift being limited compared to how it used to be, how many times do you still see a second baseman or a shortstop right there? Because as long as they're on their side of the second base bag, they're okay. So that's where the genesis of the hit the ball in the air off the left center field or right center field fence, depending on which side of the plate you hit from. But getting back to the point, we're getting off track here a little bit, getting into the weeds with that, but that's been the approach, and it worked very well in the first half. Second half, too many fly balls. Some guys too many ground balls. They have drawn more walks. They have, the last time I checked, their on base percentage in the second half has been one of the better ones in baseball, but the slug has just gone away, and there's been too much swing and miss. That's probably accompanied that, specifically with, especially the usual suspects, Colton Cowser and Jackson Holliday, Kobe Mayo when he was, but even some more established guys, a
It's
little more
created
swing and miss.
situational awfulness, though, in
Yeah,
many cases.
sure. No, I'm not sitting here like I'm not making excuse. I'm trying to explain where this is all coming from, and it just hasn't been as consistent. There's no question about that. So this final week, bringing it back to this final week, you want to get guys, get guys on a roll. Now, Adley Rutschman shouldn't start 6 games behind the plate this week, right? I mean, you don't. There's a balance here, but yeah, you want to see if you can finally see if he can get going to the point where he looks like Adley Rutschman in October, because they need that. I've said it. I've said it for weeks. We both have said it. Many people have said this. With their pitching, the way that it's presently constructed, and that's even with feeling really good with Eflin and Burns. And it's probably going to be Eflin game 1, Burns game 2, because that's where the rotation is right now. And look, they both have pitched really well of late. So I'm fine with that. I mean, that's doesn't need to be Burns game 1. I'm fine with Eflin game 1 and Burns game 2. Either way, those are the two guys I want in game 1 and game 2 now. No Grayson Rodriguez, no Bradish, no Means. Suarez has had a great year, but I don't want him to be my first or second starter at this point. It's those two guys. But
And those aren't bad guys to have.
right, exactly. I'll take that against
The Twins.
not every team in baseball with their 1-2, but I think it matches up, stacks up favorably with most, at the very least, I'd say. Especially with the way that Eflin's pitching at the moment. Burns looking more like the Corbin Burns from a few years ago. More swing and miss the last couple starts.
Which really
But
bodes well for game 1, by the way.
sure,
If there's
sure.
anything, we're not going to talk as much baseball as we probably should and could this week, which is really one of Katie Griggs' problems that I'm going to bring up when I write to Mr. Rubenstein, is that the Ravens always overshadow them, even this time. I mean, this is go time, but Corbin Burns has been really good, and he gives them a real chance to win on Tuesday, and we're not going to talk. Oh, we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about that, but later in the week we will, when we're lining up and saying who you're bringing to the gunfight in a short series, and what did we want from this franchise this time last year, right, or the year before, and the guys that we wanted weren't here, and if they were here, their arms fell off. I mean, there was a point where we thought game 1 and 2 was Bradish and Means around here. Really, right? Maybe Rodriguez too. and none of those horses are going to post. In the games that matter, who's going to post? Guy we had to go deal a shortstop for and pay him a fortune in a walk year. Watch him struggle a little bit in August, but fine. We're real happy to have him on Tuesday.
Mhm.
And the other guy is a guy you had to go out and steal on a trading deadline and make 5 deals to make one good one. You mentioned Jimenez, nothing. Don't even start me on Rogers and Norby and Stowers, and I wasn't Norby or Stowers guys. Um, Especially now the Westbrook's back. I'm cool. And that they're not going to win the division. Everybody's going to get their wish. We don't have to ice pitchers, so we don't have any of those excuses next week, right? So staying on turn, staying on point. They bring in a guy who's done this before, who they're going to pay 20 million more, 18 million more next year to be their opening day starter if they don't have any other options, right? Um, I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to bitch about Mike Elias. I'm not going to sit here and say they were underprepared or made bad. Do what Lock and Four is doing, which is do this wrestling act. I mean, th- this could and should be good enough or not. And it's good, could or should be good enough when the guys catch the ball and when Gunnar Henderson's 2 for 4 with 3 RBIs on Tuesday and Rutschman got on base a couple of times and Mullins did something. You know what I mean? They're star players, the guys who've been 30-30s and like all of that. Those guys are going to play great ball next week. They're going to catch the ball because I think the pitching is going to be okay. I don't think Corbin Burns or Zach Eflin are going to get them blown up next week. That's my vibe.
I mean, look, it's not about them, it's about everyone else. I mean, you just said it could or should be good enough. I don't know if I agree with that. I think they're a very diminished team from where they envision themselves being with Corbin Burns, Kyle Bradish, Grayson Rodriguez. Now, that said, look, they did well for themselves bringing in Eflin. I love the Eflin trade. That he's someone that I mentioned in passing going up to the trade deadline because at that point, I had no expectation that even new ownership was going to take on the salary that they did. So that was good. I mean, that was a good deal. To your point, very well could be their opening day starter next April or late March.
I'll do this right
Um,
now. I'll put $1. I'm not a gambling guy, and I'm allowed to bet all I want right now. I'd put $1 on him giving you 5 good innings on Wednesday. I,
I
I will. I
I
will.
have no disagreement with that. It's not about him and Burns. It's okay, 5 innings. What about the sixth? What about the seventh?
Okay.
All right, we get to the eighth. Danny Coulomb, Cano, Sir Anthony Dominguez, as long as he cuts out the walks, which suddenly has become a little bit of a thing. And when it wasn't a thing the first 2 months with the Orioles or
Are you a guy that
month and a
pitch
half.
95 of Zach Eflin is inferior to pitch one of pick your reliever with an out in the sixth or seventh inning? Like if he has
I mean,
some length and gets some, gets 10 pitch innings here and again and is 2 runs in, 5 runs in, and it's 4-2 in the sixth or seventh, do you do you want to see something else or do you want to see Eflin on pitch 91? I mean, that's going to be the question and where he is at that moment and how you feel about that versus going to the bullpen because I feel
yeah.
like Eflin's going to do that. And I don't know whether their season's on the line at that point or whether they're trying to close things down. That talk to me Tuesday night, I'll let you know, or Wednesday morning, I should say. But I'm trying to play this out next week in a way that we really didn't last year because they're going to play ball in the middle of next week. And a week out, we can already start to script how this is going to go. And it's going to be in our ballpark. You know what I mean? Like, I have a vision on all of this, and I think they can be successful. I really do. And I'm going to say that and write that all week. I think they have components to win a couple of short series based on some decent starting pitching and hitting the ball and catching the ball better than maybe I'm on their reputation from what they were 4 months ago and not what I've seen lately, which has been very Keystone.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, look, I like Zach Eflin and Corbin Burns. I like that as a 1-2 punch. But you just asked me where am I if Eflin's at 91 pitches. Well, you have to tell me how did pitch 75 through 90 look? Where are they at in the order? What's the score? I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, and that's where I look at this and I just say I don't see the proper established confidence instilling length to their bullpen to feel confident that they're going to navigate this because you know Corbin Burns does, even in the regular season, like even if his pitch count, that's not as much of a factor. This isn't a guy who throws complete games, and I don't say that as a knock on him. Very few guys do that anymore. So the point is, if it's 2-1 in the seventh inning, you're gonna have to get 7 outs or 8 outs from your bullpen, and I am a little unsettled about that. I mean, I just am. I mean, even the guys that I have confidence in still have a question mark attached to them. Dominguez, the walks here the last couple times out, I'm willing to say, okay, that's an aberration. Sir Anthony Dominguez has given up the long ball, right? Cano, who has been lights out the last 2 months, just missed about 8 days he didn't pitch because of some forearm tightness. Like, okay, it's looked his 2 times since that he's pitched, it's looked okay. I suppose. I mean, he did give up the runs on Saturday, but the velo isn't like way down or there aren't any red flags. But that's still in the back of my mind. Danny Coulomb is back. It's great that he's back, but he missed 3 months. I mean, is he going to be sharp, on point Danny Coulomb for if you're going to navigate this thing and get to the ALCS at the very least? He's going to have to throw some really big innings for you, Same with Jacob Webb coming off of the elbows. So I don't say this to be that they're done, but I also can't look at this thing on paper and Craig Kimbrell's not walking through that door, and you don't want him to at this. He's gone, right? I mean, they made that, and it was the right decision at that point in time. But that's not what they signed up for when they paid him $13 million.
Yeah, you pay
So
$13 million, you're not thinking about a plan B,
yeah,
or in this case, a plan C or D, which is really where
I
they
mean,
are.
and even me, like as much as I wasn't doing cartwheels over the Kimbrell, I didn't think it was going to go like this either, where he was off the roster. That he was done. I thought it was more a case of you better bring in. It's kind of what they ultimately did, and I think their hope when they acquired Sir Anthony Dominguez was that Kimbrell would get himself back on track at some point in August, and then he would either be the closer and Dominguez would be the eighth inning guy, or it would be like a one and 1A kind of situation,
If you're
which is
not
kind
good
of what
enough
I
to be the
want.
closer, you're probably not good enough to be on the team if you're Kimbrel. Because if you're, I mean, the bar wasn't high to be the closer on this team. Just, you know what I mean? Throw a couple
Well,
strikes. You know what I mean?
but he wasn't even good enough to be a sixth or seventh inning guy.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
my
that was the
point. My
problem.
point
Yeah,
is, if you weren't good enough to be the closer, you might
yeah,
as well throw the baby out with the bathwater because I'm not going to trust you in the sixth or seventh inning either.
yeah,
Because if you get there and you start getting guys out, I'm going to make you the closer again, which they did in June. So
right.
I hadn't thought about. You're like, well, I'm shocked he's off the team. I couldn't have predicted that. I'm like, well, if he couldn't close, I would think that he probably would like it wouldn't be good enough to even be here if you can't trust him to pitch.
Well, uh, I mean, I don't know about that because you still need guys, even guys like Brad Brock was a great example of this. Brad Brock at times had to fill in for an injured Zach Britton, going back to what 17, I guess that was whenever it was. It didn't go so well with him as the closer, but Brad Brock, if he was a seventh or eighth inning guy, it went really well. So point is, and we're wasting too much time talking about Craig Kimbrell. This bullpen, is it good enough? I don't know. I just don't know right now. And that's where I look at this thing, and there are ifs and maybes, and there are things to be encouraged by, but by the fact Westberg and Arias and Coulomb and Webb are back, and Mountcastle's presumably back this week, and we'll see about Grayson Rodriguez at some point if they advance and get that far.
Man, you just
But
mentioned a
there,
lot of baseball player
but
there,
there's a
right?
lot.
Literally, there's
There's
a
a
lot missing
lot.
here.
There was,
Yeah.
but there's also a lot of maybes, a lot of ifs, a lot of I don't knows when it pertains to where this roster, where this baseball team is right now. I'm in full agreement with you. I feel really good about Burns and Eflin, right? I mean, whether it's Burns, Eflin, Eflin, Burns, games 1 and 2 next week, it's going to be one or the other, right? I mean, the way it sets up now, Eflin, is ahead of Burns in terms of just the rotation as it's presented. So do you adjust that? I don't know. It might be a case where you say you go with Eflin, you're more aggressive pulling him if you feel that it's getting a little hairy at 90 pitches and you've got a fully rested bullpen because you had the off day Monday. Presumably Sunday you didn't throw any of your key guys, and then it's all hands on deck. And then you say, okay, we get that one, and then this might be the day that Corbin Burns, you hand him the ball and say, we need you to throw 110 pitches tonight, and we need you to be the bona fide ace. This is why we got you back in what, February 1st or whatever it is.
But then
That
you
might
come back
be,
and play Saturday with probably Dean Kramer starting game one or like
well,
that, right? Literally the
I
next
mean,
because
whoever,
you're not
yeah,
going
I
to
mean,
be
that,
well. That's the stretch of this whole thing is that you are going to
sure.
be matched up awkwardly as you progress because of the
And
timing of it. Really, it is. I mean, we used to think about five men rotation and, having Steve Avery back here, or even in our case, whether it was Wei and Chen or Miguel Gonzalez 10 years ago. This is a whole different thing once you navigate the first one because you're talking about 110 pitches out of Burns on Wednesday. You ain't seeing him now till game three of the next series. So even if you survive and kick their ass, literally, because of what you're doing to your pitching.
I mean, it's just, but that's the challenge. They don't have the depth right now. I mean,
That's
they
why
just
winning the
don't.
World Series is going to be harder
I
than
mean,
next
that's
week.
why it's
Yeah.
just, I think back to, like, to me, Cleveland back in 16, when they went to game 7 with the Cubs. Remember, Cleveland was kind of at a point where they were at like two starters, two and a half. What, Trevor Bauer had the drone or whatever. I can't even remember what happened where he cut his hand. And so point is, they were really short with their rotation. But what was the difference? They had a insane bullpen at that point in time. And Terry Francona rode those guys all the way to the very end, and it almost worked. This bullpen is not that. I'm not saying this bullpen can't be good or do the job, but I put it this way: if Dean Kramer or Albert Suarez is starting a game 3, whether we're talking about the AL, the division series, or game 3 of the wild card, because it's going to be Eflin Burns one order or the other, and then game 3 it's all hands on deck, right? But not those guys because they just pitched. They just threw 90 or 100 pitches. But you're going to be at a point there where it's all hands on deck. But if Dean Kramer does start that game and you have to pull him in the third inning, it's like, okay, you can go to Suarez or vice versa. I'm not opposed to saying Suarez game 3 and Kramer comes out of the pen in that situation. But I mean, how long is that chain right now? It's just not long enough. And this is where, again, you made a comment a few minutes ago that I generally agree with. I will not waver from Mike Elias hasn't done enough with the bullpen the last couple of years. That's been a little bit of a blind spot. And I thought it was a blind spot even before Felix Bautista went down. And then this offseason, look, I commend the fact that he went out and was aggressive. And I'm not saying that I would have given Josh Hader a $100 million contract either. That's the other extreme here. But I looked at that bullpen and Nestor, I've been consistent about this in spring training. I said all along I was not confident that that bullpen had enough high leverage quality arms in it. And, especially now with Craig Kimbrell completely falling apart to the point where he's gone. And look, that was the right decision. But I just look at it right now and is Coulomb going to be the best version of himself? Is Webb going to be the best version of himself? Is Cano completely healthy? Is Sir Anthony Dominguez going to avoid giving up the long ball? Gregory Soto, can he be a little more meaningful than what he's been to this point? He's actually pitched in a couple decent spots here of late and done a nice job. So hopefully, maybe, kind of, sort of, but that's a lot of question marks. It's a far cry. I'll say this much, and this is a simplistic comparison, but I'll leave you with this. It's not Zach Britton, Andrew Miller, Darren O'Day, Brad Brock, and Kevin Gausman back in 14. So we'll see. Rotation wise, top 2, hey, I'll take this. I Burns and Eflin, I like it, but I just don't know if there are enough other innings behind them that's going to get this job done to the point where they're making a deep run. But hey, who knows? And again, it's also going to come back to if you score 6 or 7 runs, then you don't need the bullpen to be as perfect. You don't need the pitching to be as perfect. But if it's 2 or 3, that's when I look at this thing and I say I don't know if it's going to add up to a long run. But we'll
Second to
see.
Maryland.
And
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
fall training continues this
Yes.
week as they need to clinch. And then, like I said, you can kind of slow play this and massage this however you want to here to get ready for next week.
I am holding the Maryland lottery tickets from the Ravens scratch offs. They were a lucky batch at Fadley's. I'm going to be at Costas this Friday. Here's the real question. we're doing a little birthday show on October the 11th at Pizza John's. They do have a crab cake there as well, some damn good pizza, and a great story to tell. I'm really looking forward to sitting down with Brett and everybody over there in Essex. I'll have these as well there. I had James Bond from the Living Classrooms Foundation on at Fadley's on Friday with Damie. We're talking oyster recovery and our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions and Curio Wellness in put me out on the road to eat all these oysters. And like October, I only have one crab cake tour on the 11th because it's the day that they're not supposed to play, but the rain could change all of that. It's a Friday. I only did one last year, if you remember. I did Drug City on my birthday, and it kind of like by then it was over with. We're back from Arlington, and you had a clubhouse badge, I didn't, and we got to see the Dallas facility we talked about earlier this week. So I'm looking at these dates in October, and I'm like, where am I going to be when Duran is playing here? And I'm like, well, I'm back in June when they announced the concert. I thought that looked like Game 3 of the World Series, and I'd have plans that night, and I'd have my press credential back, of course, because there's new ownership and Peter's dead. Right now, I'm looking at Friday the 4th, next week. Maritime Magic is next Friday. It's the biggest event of the year for Living Classrooms. And I said to James, well, the event's going to be like a pep rally for the ALDS, which is game one the next day. And, like trying to be positive about that. And then I'm thinking October 11th would be like the celebration of getting ready for the American League Championship Series. That's kind of the way I envisioned it back when I started to plan this in June and before July and August, and certainly September happened with the Orioles. When's your birthday?
October 2nd.
All right. They're going to be playing on your birthday, but will they be playing on mine? I think with the pitching, you've just made the case as to why you don't like them. And I think the reason to not like them to win the World Series will be the matchups they'll get even if they survive next week. Because they're going to get a number one starter next weekend, and it's going to be a Kramer Suarez throw it together game one. They're going to be lucky to get whoever you're trying to push Burns back. That pushes him back further in the next series if it happens. But that would be like a 3-7, 3-5. I don't know. I don't know. But like navigating this out where it's not just 18 to 27 innings, as I point out next week, where it's more like, oh, this series is going to be more like 40 to 60 innings, or, well, 30 to 40 innings, I should say, right? That's a different animal trying to get guys out when your pitching isn't as good as the other team's body of work, right?
Yeah, no question. And again, this is also in concert with, is your offense going to wake up, right? I mean, it all, but that's the thing. And you just said it. You can you can try to map this thing out, but it's literally about winning Tuesday and Wednesday. I mean, and if you don't win one of those, you got to win Thursday or your season's over. So there is no holding back here. That's why I even said, maybe it is a case where you just stay on turn and Eflin goes game one and you throw as many relievers as you feel you need to do. And then at game two, you might be a little bit lighter and you just say, all right, Corbin Burns, this is why we got you. You need to go out there and just do it. And to your point, even if that works out, then it's like, okay, now you're playing the Yankees in the division series, and who the heck's starting game one? And okay, you might, depending, because there's an off day after game one. I think that's the format. It's odd, and one thing that is helping them is with the off days built into the division series, you only need 3 starters as opposed to 4, so that does help. But boy, it's clunky trying to navigate this if you're going to have to.
Where are the outs coming from? Like literally,
Yeah.
right? Literally.
I mean, it's tough. And again, if you score 8 runs, then okay, I can give some of those outs to some lesser guys in the 8th inning if you're up 8-1. But if it's 3-2, which is how postseason games tend to be, then it's a lot. It's a lot. And that's why I said over and over and over, put it, I don't want to hear about the long layoff. I know that that's a different challenge in and of itself, but give me the opportunity to avoid that 3-game mess that can be over in 24 hours, and I can save my innings, and I can set my rotation, and I can get some of my bullpen guys a breather, even though the Orioles have a couple guys that they want to try to probably get some work for this week, Coulomb and Webb, try to get them, back in the flow, so to speak. But that's why I said, I'll take my chances with the layoff and being able to set everything up the way I want to, especially when you're talking about a team that, let's face it, they're shorthanded. on the pitching side, they absolutely are shorthanded. It's the truth. Not it doesn't mean they get a hand, they're not handicapped like golf or, no one's going to give them extra strokes or take
But it's
strokes
hard to
away
win
or
the World
whatever.
Series that way.
But it's
Yes.
really, really hard to make a deep run. Like I said, that Cleveland team about a decade ago that did it with two and a half starters, man, that bullpen was just unreal. Andrew Miller was in that bullpen, if you recall, at that point.
And well compensated
Um,
at that point
you
in
know,
his career too.
there
Yes.
just isn't that guy in the Orioles bullpen. I don't know if there's two guys in the Orioles bullpen are stack up to what that Cleveland team had or that Kansas City team had, or even that 2014 Orioles bullpen as it was constructed in October. So we'll see. Hey,
Or the
stranger things have happened.
2016 bullpen that you let Zach Britton rot at the end of the bench. So Luke Jones is here. A lot of football this week, a lot of crab cakes, and certainly a ton of oysters this week, and a lot of conversation. I've got a wild mix of conversations this week. If you come in and out of the radio station, it is the 40th anniversary of the folding of my first newspaper, Sports First, and the Baltimore News American, and John Stedman, and all those stories. I did a glorious hour with some folks talking about that period of time that you were born, Luke Jones. You were born at the beginning of Sports First, and my son was born the day after Sports First folded, which was 40 years ago this Saturday. So you'll hear from some of my colleagues. Great sports guys, great editors, really smart people. Pete Kurtzel also was a part of that team and a part of that conversation. So if you're familiar with Pete's work at Masson, Pete, and I know you're familiar because you have a press pass and I don't, and used to see Pete, but Pete will be on the air this week telling some stories as part of that. Also, at Fadley's, we talked about Living Classrooms Foundation and the Oyster Recovery Partnership. I'm going to be at the B&O Railroad Museum on Thursday night with all the oyster farmers, eating oysters, talking about the bay, talking about where the crabs and the crab cakes come from this time of year. I'll be eating some fat crabs at Costas on Friday. Leonard Raskin's going to be joining me there from Raskin Global as well. So just a big week and some conversations. I did a podcast called He's Holy, I'm Not with Reverend Al Hathaway, who's been a guest on the program, as well as Martin Knott from Air. A long conversation about sports and journalism and the city and the enthusiasm of the city and the baseball team and how sports brings us together. So you're going to be hearing a bunch of stuff on the air this week, including John Sarbanes, Congressman Sarbanes, outgoing. And here's one for you, Luke, that's going to air this week that I want to prepare people for when they get into these conversations. I had a guy call me 2 weeks ago and say, I'm writing a book on gambling in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s in American football. And I saw that you did a show with Lawrence Taylor and Buddy Ryan. Would you talk to me about that show with Mike Warren? And I said, sure, but I'd like to do it on the air as shtick because I've never told these stories. Nobody's ever asked me about it. And he played along. A guy named David Bocchino, professor at Elon University, is also an author, writes about media in America, did an hour with me and I told stories literally, Luke. You'll laugh, you'll cry. Even the beers we've drank, the rooms we've shared, the Super Bowls we've been like all of that. Even running into Lawrence Taylor, with you in Miami, I told stories that I hadn't thought and remembered in 27 years. It was 1997 that I did it. So all of that is going to be heard here on the air this week. Luke's going to be talking baseball, Yankees, Twins, obviously the Ravens getting ready for Buffalo. He is Baltimore, Luke. He is from Owings Mills to Camden Yards and back and forth, all of it powered up by Jiffy Lube Multicare as well as Royal Farms. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore positive.